Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. This is the Facts and Fallacies podcast. My name is Cameron English. That's Dr. Liza Dunn.
Hello.
Very excited to be with you all. It is a beautiful new week here on the show. We've been knocked off our routine of going through stories. We've had some awesome guests. You've been traveling a lot, so we've just had to adjust, which we did, and I think we got through it magnificently. But now we're back. We've got 3 stories to talk about. It's all really controversial and exciting. And I want to say we might have the best story we've ever talked about this week, Liza. I saw this in the headlines and I went, okay. All right. So let's, without any further ado, because we have to get right to our space after this. So here we go. Greenpeace USA faces possible dissolution after losing $667 million defamation lawsuit, and the angels all saying, hallelujah. Next up, RFK Jr. claims that the measles vaccine causes death every year. He's wrong. That's activist propaganda. And finally, FDA under Trump 2.0, Marty Makary and RFK Jr. uncertainty threatens. Very scandalous stuff we've got here. But this first story, I just want to I want a choir in the background just ringing tambourines and singing. This is so encouraging. I'm really happy to see this. And I'll explain why. But this is a story by Mary Steuer, I believe is how you pronounce it. She's a journalist for what's it called? South Dakota Searchlight. Excuse me. So it's a local story. But here's the gist of this. So it's almost a decade ago now. There was a pipeline under construction. It's now in operation and pumping oil through North Dakota. But at the time, it was under construction, and there were these mass protests that broke out. They started with a little Native American tribe in the area who were concerned that this pipeline that was running under a lake that they get their water out of was going to be a contamination risk. So it started with this tribe setting up relatively small protests, and then with the help of organizations like Greenpeace and then media outlets like Now This, which does video journalism primarily. You've probably seen their videos online. They do left-leaning advocacy. They call it journalism. It's advocacy. But they brought a lot of attention to this. They got the Obama administration involved. At one point, the administration actually halted construction of the pipeline. But in the turn of events that I was pleasantly surprised by at the time, the company that was building the pipeline sued Greenpeace for trespassing and destruction of property. And there's a great story in the Free Press about what happened. But at one point, you had thousands of people coming to this site in North Dakota. They're protesting. They left 48 million pounds of garbage behind. They chained themselves to construction equipment. They all the typical, radical activist sort of tactics. But they left a huge mess. And so the company, which is called Energy Transfer, I believe, they sued Greenpeace and they said, you were here without permission. This is private property and you destroyed a bunch of our stuff. We're taking you to court. And the run up to the trial was really funny because the company went on the offense and they said, we're coming after you. We're going to take a lot of money from you. You're going to pay for what you did. And Greenpeace, woefully unfamiliar with an opponent that's aggressive, said, this is a threat to our free speech, and we're just trying to peacefully protest. And they said, no, you weren't peacefully protesting. You were destroying our property. So here we come. And because North Dakota is, I don't know how to put it, but like an oil-friendly-ish state, there's a lot of people that work in the oil and gas industry. And so because the event took place there, the trial took place there, and the jury was, I would just say it's common sense, right? It doesn't matter what the company is or what the organization is. If you destroy someone's property or light their cars on fire, this is unacceptable.
Or put sand in their gas tanks or all sorts of things like that. That is not the same thing as free speech. That is not protected under the Constitution.
Correct. I'm glad Liza and I agree on that, right? This is obvious, right? You can't destroy other people's stuff. Anyways, not to get off topic. But the jury came back and they said, we agree with the company, and they awarded the company almost $700 million. So it was known beforehand, and it was interesting that Greenpeace tried to soften the blow a little bit because they were probably looking at the case and going, this is going to be hard to defend. And so they tried to take the free speech route, but it didn't work, clearly. So who knows what's going to happen? Maybe the award will be reduced, or I don't know what's going to happen. But as it stands, Greenpeace is split up into separate entities. So Greenpeace USA is its own thing, and Greenpeace Canada is its own thing.
Yeah.
International, right. And they do that on purpose for cases like this. But Greenpeace USA is not going to be able to sustain itself, most likely, without a huge infusion of cash. And so the grand result is they're not going to be around.
Which is amazing, right? Which is amazing. And the thing is that also, companies are oil companies are frequently targeted by activists and things like that. But companies do try to go out of their way to make a reasonable negotiation often to try to, address the concerns that people have, and because they perceive maybe that some of those concerns are valid. So I read about this case that the chair of this company, Kelsey Warren, actually went to North Dakota in 2016 to discuss a settlement with the tribes. Because as far as I can understand, and maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I understand, this was the way it was made out was that this was going through tribal land. However, the company actually had bought the property on which this was supposed to go through. It wasn't, so it was no longer tribal land, if I understood what I read correctly, one. And two, the Army Corps of Engineers had jurisdiction over where that pipeline was supposed to go as well. So it was not a question of, it sounded like initially from the reports that this was a question of eminent domain kind of discussion, right? Where a company might have been acting out of eminent domain, but it sounded like it had legally acquired and bought the property that they were running the pipeline under, and that it was much more questionable than what the press was portraying as the truth. And so once again, I think it's really important to get nuanced about this. And so the CEO or the CEO went to talk and negotiate with these folks and tried to do in good faith, saying, do you want land? Do you want, how can we help you resolve this problem? What are you seeing as a problem? And apparently they wouldn't meet with him. So that just, and companies always wind up looking like the bad guys, even though they, often act in good faith.
Yeah, that's right. It was private property, but the matter is framing. All they have to do is go to the press and feed them the facts, and then they faithfully, in most cases, reproduce them. But the only way you break that narrative is you beat them.
Yep.
So this guy, to his credit, didn't come out and apologize in advance, and he was willing to work with them. But when they said no, he's like, "Then get off my property." And
that's right.
We'll see you in court, right? And most industries don't do that. Most people don't do that. I think most people in the modern world are conciliatory. They want to get along with everybody, and so even if they're attacked, their first response isn't, well, I'm going to defend myself. It's, well, I'll be really nice and I'll show you how much I care about your cause, even if I really don't. I'm patronizing you just so you'll leave me alone. But that generally doesn't work, right? That sets you up to lose, because then they see you as an opposition that they can overcome. The Greenpeace does this over and over, right? They go into countries and they take weed whackers to field trials.
They demand
engineered crops.
Yeah, they demand. So these activist groups demand that there be more testing, more experimentation, more all of these things. They have these demands, and when companies try to fulfill those demands by doing field trials and things like that, they go rip up the field trials and get everybody, and costing hundreds of millions of dollars. And what's amazing about that is it directly affects the people who could benefit most from these scientific advances, and golden rice. I have a very hard time feeling any sympathy for an organization that has actively blocked a public health measure that could provide vitamin A to hundreds of millions of children who are at risk of vitamin A deficiency and going blind. Their lack of empathy and their lack of support for these scientific advances that could really, truly revolutionize public health in developing countries is mind blowing. And the fact that they would destroy the trials that people are doing to try to help achieve this public health goal is incredible. And they've captured the minds of academia. They've captured the minds of journalism, and what they're doing is they're actually causing an incredible amount of harm.
Yeah, I have zero sympathy. I hope you all lose your jobs and have to go work at Walmart. I really, I cannot stand you. I mean, there's no way to put a figure on it, but what you're talking about with golden rice or some of these other agricultural issues, you're talking about people losing their lives and being unable to feed their children. And you stood in the way of others who were trying to do good. And even
That's
in this
right.
case, right, this company is pumping energy through a pipe to send it to us. We all need it. The light's on right now, fossil fuel. It's just the way it is.
You guys flying your activists to North Dakota in an airplane.
Yeah. So I don't care. I'm glad you guys go away. I hope this permanently destroys your organization because you're miserable. You're just miserable people. We don't have to dwell on this much longer. I would highly recommend the story from the Free Press. It's by a journalist who was with Now This. She was making the video stories that were going viral that got the Obama administration's attention. It's called "I Helped Make Standing Rock Go Viral. Now I Regret It." It's by Lucy Biggers. It's on the Free Press, and I believe it's not behind their paywall. But it's really interesting because she goes through, we talk a lot about how they manipulate the press, NGOs and these different organizations. And she talks about how they did that. She would find a video with the celebrity saying the right things and she would put emotional music behind it. And then she would launch it on Facebook or TikTok or whatever. And it would explode. And she knew as she was doing it, especially after she went to the site and saw the mess, she knew she was manipulating their audience, but she kept doing it. And then after she got a little bit older and left Free Press, she went, I can't do this anymore. Yeah. And then she came forward and said what was really going on. So I think that's insightful. But I think this is a good instance of seeing how these groups manipulate the public, how the press helps them in many cases. And the world's a little bit better off because of this. So hooray. Go bankrupt. Don't like you. All right. Let's move on. Liza, this one is this is like the greatest hits, right? This is like now this is what I call Facts and Fallacies 2025 or whatever you want to call it. This is originally a story from Stat News. It's by Matthew Herper. It's called RFK Jr. claims the measles vaccine causes deaths every year. Excuse me. He's wrong. That's activist propaganda. That's the GLP headline, by the way, a little more acerbic than Stat News. But in any case, I'm just going to hand this over to you. So everyone, I think, listening to this show or watching this show is familiar with RFK's anti-vaccine activism. For many years, he's made all kinds of strange claims about the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, and rubella. And then here, of course, he's saying it actually kills people. What I'm getting at the story and my knowledge of this from years past, I haven't followed it terribly closely lately, is that claim is based primarily on VAERS reports, which are unverified. Mm-hmm. But then once they're verified, people go, oh, no, this wasn't the MMR vaccine. This was a car accident. And, so it's like, yes, someone got vaccinated, then they got in a car accident, or then they had some other complication that ended their life. It wasn't the vaccine. So that's the gist of it. And I think the concern here in this story and more generally in the science community is that, he's being nuanced and he's being subtle. He's not really coming out and saying, I'm going to take all these vaccines away. But what they're concerned about, I think, is he's behind the scenes. He's going to make changes in federal policy, and he's going to be putting out messaging that's going to start alarming people even more about vaccines. So what did you take away from this?
So I think that he's already done this preemptively in front of the scenes. And once again, I think that there was enough pressure put on senators to advance his nomination because of this new concern about vaccines, largely stemming from COVID, and the way COVID was managed, that it really created a political backlash against vaccines, and eventually led to his nomination. And this is why I've really asked people to engage on social media. I think that a lot of physicians and a lot of scientists, first, they're very busy doing their work. They don't have a lot of time to do social media, but they also claim that they don't want to platform people that they disagree with because they feel like they're negotiating with a flat earther. And I think that approach has really been misguided, because you are having a very large part of the population hearing just absolutely unfiltered nonsense from one side of this discussion. And since they don't know what the impact of these infectious diseases were in the past, they weren't around in the 50s when mothers were absolutely terrified that their child was going to wind up for life in an iron lung, breathing for them, or paralyzed. They aren't aware of the impacts that these diseases had. And so they sort of think of measles kind of in a way of being a childhood rash that's a little bit along the lines of the chicken pox. There's been some discussion about having measles parties, which is just really pure insanity, because people had chickenpox parties when I was growing up, because everybody got the chickenpox. It was, kind of unless you were immunosuppressed, unless you were an adult and had never had chickenpox, it was a mild sort of self-limiting illness. You got itchy and uncomfortable. But until there was a vaccine for chickenpox, that was what people did. And now people are thinking that the measles parties will do the same thing. And nothing could be more misleading. Measles is a really terrible illness. And the reason why it's a terrible illness is because you wind up being immunosuppressed for a long time after that. And it makes you more prone to other diseases because you're immunosuppressed. So, for example, going back actually to golden rice, and in developing countries, if you have a population that gets displaced by war or famine, and you start up a refugee camp for them, one of the first things that happens is you wind up doing a vaccination campaign against measles, because if you don't, measles routinely sweeps through these camps and causes devastating illness, because many of these children are malnourished anyway. And if you're malnourished, you wind up with immunosuppression just by default. And then if you don't have vitamin A in your diet, you can really have devastating complications from measles. So I have seen photographs of children with measles and vitamin A deficiency that get these big flesh-eating necrotic wounds across their faces, right? Black, they destroy their faces. They go blind. They get corneal melts because of vitamin A deficiency exacerbated by measles. So imagine having a foreign body in your eye and having that last for a long, long, long time. That's what measles, and a combination of measles and immunosuppression, or measles and vitamin A deficiency, can do. It's really, really horrible. So in order to protect kids who are immunosuppressed, or very young children who can't get the vaccine until they're 12 months old, you want to try to encourage as many people as possible to get the vaccine in order to protect people from these devastating kind of illnesses. And so, the MMR is incredibly safe. It's, the reason why you can't give it to little babies right away is because it's a live attenuated vaccine. So it's a weakened virus. And since they are a little bit more immunosuppressed at childbirth, you don't want to give it right away. You want to give it when they're about a year old. And then you want to give them a booster a little bit later. And then generally speaking, that vaccine protects you for life. Now, if there's an outbreak and you can get some titers, When when the Lancet article and Wakefield published his article in the Lancet, I was in Ireland, and a whole bunch of parents got terrified about it and wound up not vaccinating their children. And then there was a huge measles outbreak with deaths there. And so, as a physician on a pediatric ward, or as a medical student on a pediatric ward, I had to have my titers checked, and my titers were low. So I wound up getting a booster as an adult. So that might be another reason for a booster. But this is not a mild self-limiting disease. This disease makes kids very, very sick, and very many get hospitalized. And yes, it may not seem like a lot of kids, 500 deaths a year prior to the introduction of the vaccine. But the reason why those deaths happened, the mortality from measles was much higher prior to the development of very good intensive care and also antibiotics. So this is one of the other comments that you hear from RFK Jr. They aren't dying from measles, they're dying from pneumonia, and antibiotics will treat it. Well, that is because the reason why they're getting this pneumonia is because they're immunosuppressed. So you get a bacterial superinfection on it. And you can wind up dying from that. And so, yes, antibiotics are part of treating that bacterial superinfection, but you could prevent that superinfection anyway. So mortality prior to the introduction of vaccines and antibiotics was much higher. And here I am watching the dismantling of these really important public health advances to try to prevent this death from this illness. And these deaths are tragic and they're avoidable. So I hope that covers some of the discussion.
Yeah, that's great. One thing that other people have pointed out as well is that Kennedy, and he wrote an op-ed for Fox News a few weeks ago now, and to his credit, I don't know what his motivations were, but he said people should get this vaccine for their kids because he doesn't want his first event on record as Health and Human Services Secretary to be measles outbreak.
Well, look at all these kids died.
Yeah. So he did say that people need to vaccinate their kids, which drew his followers nuts. They just were like, what are you doing? But later in the article, he started to talk about, supplementation and the importance of vitamins, and in particular vitamin A. Now that's interesting because that's not going to prevent an infection. Like if you get sick and you're deficient, that can be really bad. But if you have appropriate levels of vitamin A,
it's not going to do anything.
Right. But the other thing is that he opposes golden rice, which is, as you mentioned a minute ago, the genetically engineered crop that boosts vitamin A in kids. So I don't know
how to square that circle.
Yeah, it's just pure cynicism, or he's dumb, and he's very smart, right? Like
that's the thing, is he is not dumb.
Yeah.
He's not dumb. He wouldn't have gotten to where he's gotten without. And I think that's the other thing is that a lot of physicians and a lot of public health people think that he's ridiculous, he's stupid, he does, and he has clearly outmaneuvered everybody. And so what that means is we have to reevaluate how we have approached these discussions, and we need to figure out how to do better. And unfortunately, if we don't engage, and a lot of scientists have gone off to blue sky because they don't like the political tone of X or the political tone that other sites have taken. But when you have half the population listening to a one-sided view, I don't care if you're right or left, if one side of the population is on one side and one side of the population is on the other side, and you can't have any middle ground because you can't cross-pollinate or have a discussion with somebody who disagrees with you. I think we've gotten so polarized that it's incredible that the people are not willing to defend their science, and this is the outcome of it. And so I ask people to come back and not assume malignant intent of most of the people who have questions about science.
Well, the funny thing, I guess funny is the wrong adjective. The frustrating thing is that for more than a year in the run up to the election, probably more than a year, all we heard was how insane this guy was. Like high profile scientists, I mean, all the way up to the top of the federal government, major figures who otherwise do great work like Dr. Peter Hotez. All they did was say, I'm not going to platform this guy. I'm not going to talk to him. I'm not going to engage. I'll go on Joe Rogan after him and talk about what he got wrong, but I will not give him a platform, which of course is giving him a platform. I mean, like his name was in the news, in the headlines almost constantly for months on end. You know, so what you did is you turned him into this martyr figure of a kind, which he loves. I mean, people like that, just him personally, like his personality type, they thrive on that, right? It's like whole milk. It's like they love that kind of attention. They really, that's what their movement goes on, that and money, unearned wealth. But you do that, and then you step away, right? Then the predictable result is, well, everyone's talking about this guy, and I'm a scientist, and I'm not very good at this, so I just can't. I'm just going to blue sky, right? So you create the circumstances that allow this guy to flourish, and then you leave, and you go, well, you know, as the more superior in the situation, I'm just going to go talk to people who think just like I do.
Yeah, and once again, you gotta defend it, and it's, you know what, it's hard, and sometimes it's scary, and you know, but
you know what,
I've got very good friends. I've got very good friends whose labs depend on the NIH. Right, they're doing unbelievable research. They're incredible scientists, and I'm like, please come talk to the other side, because they're paying the taxes, right? And they want to know that all they're hearing is the negative side of science. They're not hearing the positive side of science. But so please come explain to them why it's important for them to not completely throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to gutting the NIH. And same thing with measles stuff. I want infectious disease doctors to go tell people this is a preventable illness. You all were so worried about, you know, the consequences of giving the mRNA vaccine to your teenage boys. Aren't you worried about the consequences of measles in your children? It's, you know, you talked about, you know, very, 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 very rare side effects with COVID. Aren't you worried about the actual disease? It's people, but there are not enough people who are willing to talk about that.
Yeah. You know, I don't think it's that hard, to be honest. Like, you've done the hard part. You know, you have an advanced degree in a science. That's the hard part, right? Like understanding a disease process or how the body works or how to make a vaccine. Like, that's the hard part, you know? Getting it on camera and talking to people, it's awkward and it takes work, like most things do, but it's really not that hard. I mean, like, you can see when Kennedy speaks and you're familiar with the topic, you can see where he's spinning bullshit. Like you just, like, there's certain in the conversation, right? He like ties up a little knot, and even I, as a layman, can go, well, that's wrong. I know that's wrong, right? And it's not because, you know, I've spent 30 years studying vaccines. It's like, well, I'm a critical thinker. I can read. I can put a little bit of thought into this and go, okay, like, it's not hard to unspin that, right? If you could get in a room with him and you could go, hey, you said the study says this. What it actually says is the exact opposite.
That's right.
Please explain yourself, right? And he'll and you've caught him in a lie. That's all you have to do. You do that over and over and over, and you get it on camera. And then you have other people go, hey, this guy just caught you in a lie. And then you just grind him down. That's all you do. And you don't have to be mean. You don't have to, you know.
And like, if I can get on and publicly debate Steve Kirsch, you can get on and talk to people who have questions. Yeah. Right? It's not this. I mean, Steve Kirsch is an anti-vaxxer. If I can get on and talk to him and not be worried about talking to him, you can get on and talk to moms with questions.
Yeah. And here's the fascinating part of this is that people like Liza who will do this are kept away from it because there's like these gatekeepers in science, right, with bigger platforms who say, well, we don't debate the bad guys. As a science community, we've all decided, right? So no one with the juice to get it done will go on Joe Rogan with him. If Liza went on Joe Rogan with Kennedy, it's game over. We win. It just like it's and I mean obviously I'm biased because I do this show with you, but you're very good at this and you know the topic backwards and like he just wouldn't last.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like that's it, right? That's the game winning point. So go do it and
Let's make science great again.
There you go. There you go. That's going to make everyone thrilled, right?
It's going to make everybody
Would it be Misga? MSGA? Yeah, put that on a hat. It sounds like some kind of weird preservative that you're not supposed to have.
It totally does.
Okay. All right. Final story as we wrap up here, head into our space. This is by Dr. Henry Miller, colleague of mine at the American Council on Science and Health, former FDA inspector, by the way. He worked at the Center for Biotechnology, I think is what it was called at the time. He's published a story over the years. His team approved Humulin, which was the first genetically engineered insulin product, which is
amazing,
huge innovation. That's a story for another time. But Henry's done some cool work, and he's a great writer. So I encourage everyone to read this. It's called The FDA Under Trump 2.0, Marty Makary and RFK Jr. Uncertainty Threatens. What he's getting at here is there's a lot of concern, obviously, about RFK, as we've just discussed. But Marty Makary, who I believe is a surgeon from Johns Hopkins, if I'm not mistaken,
mm-hmm.
Liza.
Mm-hmm.
And, throughout the pandemic, he became one of these COVID contrarian types who was against vaccine mandates and mask mandates and lockdowns. He was one of the plaintiffs in the Murphy v. Missouri lawsuit over social media censorship during the pandemic. And because of his prominence, he was nominated for this role as head of FDA, administrator of FDA. And Henry's, I think in some cases, understandably worried. In other cases, I think his concern is a little bit exaggerated. But nevertheless, he's going through some major FDA programs. And he's saying, this is what the agency was planning to do. This is going to help innovate. This is going to get more medicine on the market.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to expand access. And now we're not sure if this is going to advance or not because Makary is known as, I don't like the phrase misinformation or super spreader, but he's been identified by people in science as a misinformation source. And so now they're worried that he's going to start gumming up the works at FDA. So maybe start with this. I mean, I know this is a huge topic, so say whatever you can and nothing else, but how is FDA operating right now in terms of getting new drugs approved? And are you at all worried that something is going to change that's going to prevent them from doing what they should be doing?
So I don't know. This is a really interesting, nuanced question for just in general. Right now, I think everybody's in a holding pattern, treading water, because they don't know how this is all going to fall out. I think that people like Jay Bhattacharya, I think that people like Marty Makary are labeled as contrarians and things like that, and I think that I disagree with some of the stuff that they've said too. But I think that because they have a science background, might be able to diffuse some of the extreme craziness that comes out of the RFK camp. I don't know. I don't know how that's going to fall out. But in terms of, so let's just start at the very beginning. What it takes to get a product from the bench to the bedside for FDA is the investigation of literally thousands of molecules that may have a therapeutic effect. If you can look at the shape of the molecule and see if its binding properties are to receptors that might target a specific disease or a specific organ system and things like that. So you look at thousands of them, you get a couple of candidates that look like they are promising. Then you do a battery of tests on animals to see, or you start in silico on the computer looking at those databases. Then you pick your candidates, you go from there, and then you start doing in vitro stuff, looking at what their effects on cells and how they interact with cellular receptors and things like that. And then you move to animals, and all of these tests are done under very strict guidelines called good laboratory practice, where the regulatory agencies make you do all these tests. Well, they'll do the theoretical stuff in the lab in academics first often, or if you have an idea as a company, you can. But the very, very beginning bench work starts in the lab. Then when the idea looks promising enough, it'll get handed off to the regulatory team. And this is where industry often comes in. Then you have to do a battery of regulatory tests after the initial drug shows some promise in the lab in research and development. You hand it off, and those regulatory tests are done under good laboratory practice, where you have the regulatory bodies designing the protocols, making sure that the laboratory equipment and the testing is all validated. They can audit any of your tests and things like that. If then you get through those tests, and then you start doing clinical trials. And the first clinical trial is very small in healthy volunteers. And you wind up making sure that you've got some efficacy, and that the dose goes, you decide what your dose is then. Then you move on to phase 2 and phase 3 trials. And then once your product is launched, you've talked about a 10 to 15 year process, often over $1 billion worth of testing. The testing is auditable. It is, and side effects are reportable by law. And then after that is on the market, you have a whole process of pharmacovigilance to make sure that that very rare side effects that you wouldn't have picked up in your studies that looked at thousands of people, that very rare side effects aren't showing up. And so here's where this gets very, very cumbersome. And when you have a disease like COVID, or you've got a disease like HIV, which was killing people very rapidly, or you've got cancers that are killing people, there's a lot of pressure back on the agencies. So FDA approves it after all of this rigorous testing. When you've got the public concerned about a pandemic or a disease that kills people like cancer, patients feel like they don't have all that time to wait. And so here's what Operation Warp Speed did for the regulatory agencies. It was unprecedented, and I think it was actually a very good move. Well, let's preface this with during the AIDS pandemic, when the activist organization ACT UP really started putting pressure on the FDA to start approving drugs faster in order to treat people and so they wouldn't die, right? FDA was overwhelmed with those kinds of things, and the pharmaceutical industry decided to help FDA hire more people to be able to expedite these testing procedures in order to get drugs approved more rapidly. No good deed goes unpunished, however, because pharma is now accused of, influencing FDA because they pay for these things. But no, they were trying to actually help expedite the process. That got put on steroids during Operation Warp Speed, when it was a first time ever real cooperation between the private sector, the government sector, and the academic sector to try to come up with a vaccine and go through all of the testing in a abbreviated time. So Operation Warp Speed has the potential, that model has the potential to not decrease the regulatory requirements needed to get a drug on the market, but to actually expedite get rid of some of the bureaucracy associated with getting drugs on the market, so you can address disease much more quickly. And I think that that's what was kind of happening at FDA, was how to streamline these testing and how to make it less red tape, more higher throughput, and in the meantime identify things that could be risky. And so I am afraid that kind of thing is going to get sidelined, and you are going to get a lot of red tape because people are so jaded by what happened with the COVID response. And I think that RFK Jr. Has the potential to really impact that. I can't personally comment on what I think either Jay Bhattacharya or Marty Makary are going to do, because I just understand. I know what they did during COVID, but I don't know that that's going to take away from their scientific expertise in making sound decisions. In this case, I just don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't think anyone does. And as I reread Henry's story here, I don't think he knows, right? He
Hmm.
sets up that he's concerned about Makary as sort of a, you know,
Loose cannon.
right, like he's unpredictable, he's made wrong calls in the past, and now he's in charge of these programs that seem to have been going in the right direction, perhaps. So there's things like the Advanced Manufacturing Technologies Designation Program, which seeks to incentivize the adoption of novel manufacturing processes. Okay, so these sort of things where you have FDA saying, do it this way, it'll be faster. We'll let people have this over-the-counter drug without the onerous
Yeah.
regulatory process. These kind of things are good. I don't think, at least from what I've heard from him, I don't know him personally, but I haven't heard anything that would suggest that Makary would oppose any of this stuff. One of the things that may be somewhat concerning, because I've heard some people from his camp, if you want to call it that, they've attacked the mRNA platform for vaccine
Yeah. And
development.
I'm concerned about that because I think that
So
that's
I could see
really
them. I could
promising
see them.
science.
Yeah, I could see them targeting specific things and saying, "I don't trust this piece of technology. We're going to scrutinize this harder." I think that would be bad.
But he's a pancreatic cancer surgeon, and the mRNA vaccine is being looked at that very dangerous cancer that with a very high mortality, and so he's got to be aware. I'm sure he's aware of those studies. So it may nuance that. It may provide some nuance.
Yeah, yeah. And when it comes to people criticizing his stance during COVID, I always like to ask, I'm like, well, what did he do? Did he go to sex parties with his wife while everyone else was locked down? Did he do that, or did he sign an open letter endorsing rioting before there was a vaccine? Did he do that, or um, did he tell everyone that? Did he put out a model that said 500,000 people are going to die, and then meet up with his married girlfriend? Oh, no, no, no. Those are all the people that destroyed your life and your career. Those people, right? Now, those people can keep their jobs and we'll let them be in charge. But this Makary guy who said that masking 2-year-olds was over the line, that guy's
And that's where the fury comes from. That's where the
yeah,
fury comes from. That's where it comes from.
yeah,
And the other thing that, just to be clear, most scientists weren't advocating for this. Most academics weren't advocating for those things. They were busy doing their work. And when you put your head down and you're busy doing your work, you don't really pay attention to the world around you. But you have to pay attention to the world around you because, and it's those scientists that I want to come back and stand up and say something, not the ones who were pushing things that hurt people and then expected them to just fall in line. And I think that I'm afraid of painting all academics and all scientists with this one brush because I think the vast majority of them aren't doing this, but they were the ones that were making the most, had the most public voice and making, and people who disagreed with them, if you did disagree with them and you were concerned about your job, you just didn't say anything because you
yeah,
needed to get your job done.
yeah.
It's a tough line to toe.
It's really challenging, but again, it goes back to I think something we're talking about a few minutes ago. My brain, I got dad brain right now. Um, the game is rigged in many cases, right? Like they tell you this is the consensus, and this incidentally is why I'm tired of people arguing from consensus. Is that you make the consequences so severe that if anyone opens their mouth, their career is over. They're going to lose their funding, right? All of a sudden, we all care about grant funding, but destroying the reputation of someone like Jay Bhattacharya, that's fine, right? The editor of Science, Holden Thorpe, all of a sudden cares about censorship in the universities because
Right.
his team is now the subject of it. I'm like, where you been for the last 20 years, dude?
This is why you have to have a
Right.
dialogue.
So
You have to have a
yeah,
dialogue.
it's essential, right? It's not like well, let's see, we need to get to the best idea. It's like, no, you're so locked up in your own ideological bubble that you're oblivious to the fact that you might be wrong. And that's the problem. I'm just tired of I don't want to hear anyone say, the expert consensus says that this virus started in a wet market. I don't care. I don't care. If
And the
you
horse
have
is
all
out of
of
the
you,
barn anyway,
right,
right?
right.
So
But if you have all your degrees and all of your fancy understanding, then you explain to me why that's true. Don't take a head count and say, well, me and all my friends agree. I couldn't
let's
care
hear the
less.
scientific basis for your
Yeah.
claim.
Yeah.
And then entertains the counter argument. This is, once again, this is not that the world is flat. This is a scientific discussion, and we have them all the time in medicine, and we have them all the time when we're managing patients, and that's really important to be able to have a discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. And the topic doesn't matter. I just picked that to be the most controversial thing I could think of. But yeah, just like explain the facts, right? If you think something's true or you know something is true, this vaccine does this, then just say that. Don't say,
Yep.
all of us big brains. Oh,
And if you're wrong, have the humility to say so.
yeah, yeah, or at least shut up after you're wrong. Stop insisting that everyone follow your advice when you're saying dumb things.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, we're getting far afield. I'm obviously still all worked up over COVID. What can I say? So we don't know what's going to happen at FDA. I'm hopeful, right, that maybe the fringier stuff will stay in the closet and they'll just streamline the drug development process.
Which would be great.
Yes. Okay. All right. We're going to get off here. We've got our space in just a few minutes. Those are every Friday at 11 a.m. Central Time. They're on X. Come follow us. We'll tell you all about them. It's at Dr. Liza MD. I'm at CamJ English. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.
See you next time.